wandering. And then a few months later, I heard, "Go, go." My contract was ending. I had no desire to stay on. I felt deep down that a change was needed. I followed that voice and listened to my instincts. I sold my furniture, gave away my books and returned my flat. I kept only the bare necessities, which were reduced to a small wicker basket with 2 handles that I still have, symbol of this change that would transform my life. I had signed up for a harmony singing course without having a single cent to pay for it. I went by hitchhiking, it was far away, and all I had to carry was this little basket. It was the first time I hitchhiked. I was so scared. Afraid of being mugged. But the urge to leave and follow my instinct was stronger, so I left everything. It was a one-way trip, a leap into the void, a challenge I threw at fate. When I got there, I saw the others, normal people with big suitcases, a well-established situation, stable financial means. For them, this internship was a form of entertainment they offered themselves. For me it was a springboard into the void. What happened next? I didn't know. I was completely out of step. During the welcome meeting, I explained that I had no money. They were flabbergasted. I asked to be allowed to stay and listen as a free listener without participating and in return to do the dishes or any other household chores they would like to give me. They hesitated, but somehow I was also challenging them to put into practice the spirituality they were teaching. They did not dare to refuse, and thank God they accepted the deal, a bit forced though. During this course I met an elderly woman who was touched by my approach and my story. She offered me to come back to Paris with her and to stay with her for a while. She was sincerely spiritually searching, and her help was blessed because it allowed me to make a link between my life before and after. It was a form of tacit contract. She had given me a key to her apartment where I could sleep and take shower. Out of respect, I didn't want to weigh on her life or interfere. She understood this and also saw that I did not take advantage of it. I still don't know how I managed to keep it up, but it lasted almost a year. During the day I wandered around Paris. I would meet unlikely people. My main focus was always to follow this voice that guided me. I wanted to overcome this fear that I felt was eating away at me. To do this, I would take the last metro and go to the end of the line, in Montrouge. And I would walk home. The game was to stay concentrated, focused within myself and to walk. Once, I wrapped myself in a big red cloth like a Tibetan monk. With each man I passed or heard walking behind me, I had to double my efforts to stay focused and not allow my mind to jump around. Above all, not to let the fear rise to my heart like an urge to vomit. Just batten down the hatches, stay locked in and walk. And it worked. I returned home, proud and happy to have triumphed over this ordeal. I felt liberated. Today, not even in a dream, I'm doing it again. But it was a special time, an initiatory time. In the same spirit of overcoming the breaks I felt were holding me back, I also set myself this challenge. I had to go into a bank and ask to speak to the manager. As a symbol of power and authority, I had a revenge to take against those who had crushed me. I was testing the power of intention and how our state of mind builds walls or dissolves them. Nothing better than trying to get past the barrage of secretaries and other obstacles on the way. That's how I found myself doing all the banks on Boulevard Saint-Germain. Failure after failure, I refined my approach until I reached this bank, where I made no mistakes. I managed to neutralize the secretary's mind and find the right energy to stage an argument with the right vibratory intention behind it so that she could accept it. So I found myself able to go upstairs and enter the director's office, still very focused internally but not knowing absolutely what I was going to say or how I was going to handle the rest. I chose to tell the truth, and once I was in front of him, he told me, "Yes, I am listening. You wanted to see me? In fact, I just wanted to meet you. It's a challenge I set myself." I was too focused inside to get off my rail and watch the look on his face. He and I were in two different, incompatible worlds. Once my bomb had been dropped, I realized that it wasn't enough to go in, you had to come out with dignity. So the exercise was to hold the mental and energetic script with firm concentration until the end. I felt like Moses crossing the Red Sea, between high walls of subtle energy, walking on a small corridor between two banks. The slightest misstep, and the army of Egyptians, secretaries, security guards, and tutti quanti would descend on me. I could already feel them rumbling beyond these energy walls. I was on high alert, but by the grace of God I held on and found myself safe and sound on the pavement. Phew. On another occasion, the objective was to find a group of Tibetan musicians giving a concert at a place I didn't know in Paris, and I didn't have a map. Google Map didn't exist yet, so I used the transcendental GPS, aka the little voice, to guide me by simply asking this question. Right or left? It was a game, but a serious one. A life-size exercise in autopilot with intuitive auditory recognition. Part of me was skeptical, a legacy of parental conditioning that I wanted to uninstall. Trusting one's intuition is not as obvious as one might imagine. It is a permanent choice by discernment between the noisy voices of the mind and the soft, fine, and subtle voice of the heart. Still, following that little voice scrupulously and without procrastinating, I arrived right at the concert venue. Because I was still wrapped in my big red cloth, they let me in without paying, thinking I was part of the troupe. So I went backstage to watch the concert where, between two roars of trumpets and bells, I met the surprised but benevolent looks of the monks who looked at me as if we knew each other. At the end of the concert, one of them gave me his card and invited me to meet him at his house. I went, but I was not very impressed or convinced by this person who I found very ordinary. As the months went by, my wandering in the street took on a different meaning. I stopped moving. I would sit and some people would stop or come up to me and say that they could see I wasn't like the others. So we would talk and I would tell them things about themselves. This surprised them. It was a time when breaking the ice was done very quickly and getting into the heart of the person was almost immediate. A bubble of space-time opened up as if under the effect of a particle accelerator and the message could be delivered. At this time I also started to do intuitive etheric healing. The synchronicities were palpable as if from nowhere. One day I was walking down the street. It had been almost 3 days since I had eaten. I could feel my subtle body beginning to float above my physical body like a balloon untied from its moorings. Suddenly I heard a voice behind me saying, "Miss, can I invite you to the restaurant?" He was a young man of Lebanese origin. I was not mistaken about his intention, but I was hungry, so I accepted and we had lunch together. Of course, he wanted to see me again, but I declined. He was not really motivated by my proposals and spiritual speeches, just as I was not motivated by his desire for night sports. He wanted to conclude and I wanted to remain free. As he didn't want to let me go and to have peace, I accepted his appointment for the next day, but I didn't go. I hid myself. A few months later, I tried to integrate into a normal life again. I was getting tired of this wandering. I really wondered what I was doing on Earth, as I felt so out of place and inadequate. I was also carrying a form of guilt that I was a failure, that I wasn't good enough or up to the task. Through my street encounters, I had integrated a circle of Peruvians and made some friends. I was learning Spanish on the job. I found in their company a human warmth and a spontaneous friendship that I had missed in my family. They gave me shelter and food without question. They were poor and shared what they had. I felt welcomed and welcome. We laughed. It felt good. I felt like them. We were made of the same human species, simple people without pretension. Not at all intellectual, but with a big heart, and that felt good. In order to bring about change, I enrolled at the University of Oriental Languages and at the Institute of Higher Studies of Latin America. But there again I felt out of place. I was aware that I came from a family of intellectuals, and that I had been educated accordingly, but this lack of human warmth had dug a gaping hole that endangered the foundations of my personality and made it impossible to pursue a normal course without having to drastically readjust all my life parameters. This is what was slowly happening and what I had gone looking for by creating these ruptures and this jump into the void. The search for the missing parts of ourselves leads us through arid and dangerous stages. This rodeo was a form of survival instinct that pushed me to put myself in danger. We do it because it's vital, otherwise we wouldn't even attempt it. Because man cannot live without fire, he goes looking for it elsewhere, sometimes very far away, or in a divergent and bizarre way. One day I overhear my Peruvian girlfriend talking with her husband. She wanted to bring her brother to France to get him out of the violent political turmoil and misery of his country. She wanted to pay for a sham marriage, but wondered how to find 20,000 francs, the only way she could save his life and get him out of there. I told him, "Well, why do you want to pay that much? I can marry him." She looked at me dumbfounded. "You? Would you do that?" "Well, yes. And that's how I got married to his brother in the town hall of the 17th arrondissement. He was 2 years younger than me and didn't speak a word of French. We agreed that when it was his turn to say yes, I would quietly nudge him." The mayor made a long speech, no doubt touched by the unlikely couple we seemed to form. Then, without transition, she addressed him with the customary question. "Mr. CHSC, do you want to take as a wife?" A long silence. I suddenly realized that he didn't understand anything and didn't know that she was talking to him. I then gave him a big elbow which made him jump and he then shouted loudly, as soldiers do at attention, "Yes, ma'am." It was hilarious. Just before the ceremony, my girlfriend bought me a green suit and shoes and I changed in the bathroom. She and her husband were the witnesses. We met up for a drink afterwards. They were really happy. I took advantage of this to change my name. Another way of escaping a little more from the straitjacket of this family name I could no longer bear. It had been 2 years since I had chosen to disappear without a trace. Then I found a maid's room in exchange for a few hours of cleaning and childcare and I did odd jobs to cover the food. In those days, all you had to do was walk into a shop and ask for a job to get one. I did all the shops on my street, sometimes as a delivery girl, sometimes as a salesgirl or waitress. I never stayed very long, because every time I did, who I was seemed to blow up the situation, even if I didn't say anything and did my job properly. Somehow it would end up creating some kind of intolerable tension for the boss. So I would go somewhere else. I didn't belong anywhere anyway. Spiritual soul emigrated on earth. One day, I had no food and no money either. On my way home, I found a 50-franc note on the red carpet in the stairwell. It saved my day that time too. On the reading side, I was absorbed in Ma Ananda Moyi's book. I felt very close to her and her experience. As I walked along absorbed, I saw in the distance in my inner vision a tall golden figure dancing, arms raised to the sky. I didn't know who he was. It seemed like a promise at the end of the road. I forgot this memory for a long time, and would only make the connection years later when I would recognize that this person was Lord Caitanya, the divine incarnation of the Supreme Lord who had come in this age of Kali to save every living entity. By spreading the chanting of his holy name, he gives everyone this simple and powerful remedy, suited to our precarious spiritual condition and alone capable of freeing us from the shackles of this world by developing the only thing that matters in the end, love of God. He follows us and watches over us from life to life until we are ready. And then the serious stuff happened. I was a bread delivery girl for the 24-hour bakery in the Odeon district. I lived in the same street and often went for evening walks along the Boulevard Saint-Germain. One evening, when the moon was full, I was walking, conscious of releasing a powerful fluid, carried by the moon. It was invisible but palpable. Soon I felt a man walking behind me. He approached me with the usual approaches which I pushed away without even looking at him. He insisted. I then turned my head and asked him, "What sign are you?" He was quick to respond. "Sagittarius ascendant Libra." "What is your name?" "Philippe." Then I really looked at him. He was not bad. There was something sincere about him. something like Brel. We walked and he told me a bit about his life. How his wife had died last year. A bad turn. He had 2 young children his mother was looking after for the time being, while he recovered. He came from a large family in the south of France. His mother was a gynecologist. He had golden skin and complexion and seemed to be well educated. He told me he had studied political science. He was 38, and I was 25. We will see each other several times. He was grieving, I was wondering. Despite our differences, he said I was just what he needed, but he didn't want to be tied down. I thought I had found someone I loved. The first night I told him, I would like a child with you. He had jumped up. Some men don't like to be reminded of reality. On the night of May 9, 1990, he was asleep and I felt, looking up at the stars through the small skylight on the roof, that a soul had been caught in the nets. It was a vision rather. A visible intuition. At the end of the month, I was waiting for my period to come around the 26th. But nothing. After a few days, I understood. It was a Saturday morning, the day before I had gone to buy a test. The 2 pink lines appeared like a sledgehammer. I got dressed and went out for a hot chocolate at the Odeon Cafe. It was 9 o'clock in the morning and my life had changed once again. My contract ended in a month and my room's contract ended at the end of July. I couldn't be in a more precarious situation. The following week, during my break, I sat down for a drink. The baker had joined me. I looked into his eyes and thought. He has eyes that see beyond. I didn't know him any better than that, but he told me abruptly. You, in 3 months, will meet the cause of all causes. You will find the solution, it will be like a key, you just have to pick it up. I couldn't understand anything he was saying. Then a few days later, Philippe rang my doorbell. I went downstairs. He looked at me and said, You have a strange face, what's wrong? I am pregnant. Silence. He hadn't planned this. We walked for a while. He finally told me. Have it sucked in. I didn't say anything. But I knew that this was not a viable option for me. I had attended a lecture on auras a few years earlier and remembered very clearly the picture of the aura on the hands of a doctor who was performing abortion as well as that of the woman who had been aborted. The speaker had shown the spots in these auras, like energy holes. This made an impression on me. Life is very intelligent. It always sends us all the information we need to know before we make our own choices. It never catches us off guard. That doesn't mean that the choice is easier, but at least we are warned and we know. The few people I spoke to about it all said the same thing. But get an abortion. You have no security, no stability, you'll make a mess. All of them, except for a Russian colleague who worked with me in this Russian restaurant in the Rue Saint-André des Arts. She told me in her beautiful accent. Don't do it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I felt that she was telling the truth, and I listened to her after hesitating for 3 weeks. Every night I went to sleep thinking, okay, tomorrow I'm going. And every morning I would wake up with both hands on my stomach and say to myself, no, that's impossible. I can't do that. Finally, I made a deal with life. I told her, okay, I don't want an abortion but I don't want an ordinary soul either. I want a soul that comes to help others spiritually, or else in 3 months I will have a miscarriage. At that moment, I heard. If you keep it, I will give you everything to raise it. It was the first time I had heard that voice. It was infinitely soft and at the same time extremely penetrating and powerful. The end of July came. I was out of work and homeless. Philippe had disappeared after I asked him to acknowledge paternity. I had foolishly followed a friend's advice, and he had become afraid. He wasn't ready. His life was already a collapse. I understood this and never blamed him. Life had made a special arrangement to set up the conditions for landing in this world in perfect harmony with the needs of this arriving soul, and no matter how difficult, everything was perfect. But at that time I was not yet at that point of understanding, and I lived the years that followed again sitting on a chasm, a huge void. In my travels I met a Peruvian political refugee. He was a poet and wanted 10 children with me. I explained to him that I didn't know what to do with the one I had, so having 10, he was staying with another Peruvian friend in a tiny room in the university campus. I found myself there. We slept on the floor, stuck together like sardines. He was cooking chickpeas. I thought it was strange. One day I came home and told him. I saw a book today in the window of a bookshop, by a certain Ramakrishna, do you know? At these words I saw him jump like a devil out of a box, and he said very angry. Ramakrishna? He is an impersonalist. I will show you who the real Krishna is. And on August 14, 1990, he took me to the temple of Krishna devotees, which was then in Noisy Le Grand. It was a day of celebration. It was the most important day of the whole year for them. It was Janmashtami, the anniversary of Sri Krishna's appearance. The whole temple was abuzz. We first entered a small living room where a devotee welcomed us. After the initial introductions, my attention was drawn to a book on a coffee table. I asked what it was. He replied. These are the Puranas, ed note, pronounced Purana. Puranas? But I've been looking for them for years. Indeed, during my first meeting with Master Ivanov, he had spoken about the Puranas. This word had fascinated me, and I had since developed the secret desire, like an impossible dream, to be able to find and read these famous Puranas. So I picked up the book, looking first at the pictures at the beginning. The one on the right, I thought, he is a fraud, and the one on the left, he is a genuine personality. Without knowing it, I had spotted on the right the one who had left with the cash register in 1986, and on the left the one who was to become the most important inspiration of my life. Then I opened the book again at random and came across this verse written in Sanskrit and translated into French. I am Krishna, God, the Supreme Person, the cause of all causes. The mysterious words of the baker came back to me. I was amazed. After a quick calculation, I realized that it had been exactly 3 months since he had spoken to me. At the same time I remembered the deal I made with life. It had also been 3 months. I was 3 months pregnant, and I was on the day of Krishna's appearance in his temple after he had made 5 attempts to approach me in 25 years of life. I realized then that my wish had been granted. But for now, a party at a Hare Krishna temple was a lot of music, dancing, the smell of food and incense everywhere. The rule was to fast until midnight, which I did. To get me in the mood, a Brazilian devotee very kindly offered to lend me a sari, the traditional dress of Indian women. I followed her into the house next door, which was the women's quarter. She showed me a pile of multicolored fabrics and asked me to choose the one I liked. I chose the one that was all white. She said to me, "This one belonged to Jajirani, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada." I didn't know who she was, but I liked the white. And for the top, I chose a white t-shirt with a curious design on it, like a smiley face but with a black background and black eyes with red circles. She said to me, "He is Krishna in his form of Jagannath, the Lord of the universe. And this shirt belonged to a Swami." Then she suddenly disappeared. It had all happened very quickly in a whirlwind, and I was left alone in the room with 8 meters of this white cloth and no idea how to get out of it. I managed to wrap myself in it as best I could. Then I walked slowly, like a Chinese woman, to the temple. I found it strange and inconvenient and wondered how others did it. As I opened the door to enter the temple, I came face to face with a resin statue of an imposing figure sitting on a sort of throne. Immediately these words came from the bottom of my heart. He is my spiritual master. The reconnection was immediate and without question. Instinctive and brutal. A matter of course. I got down on my knees to pay my respects to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Yet already a contradictory emotion had arisen. Loyalty to the spiritual master is a serious matter, and my connection to Master Ivanov, even though he was no longer physically present, was still prevalent in my heart. Even though in recent years I had broken away from the regularity of the daily practices he taught, I was still grateful and faithful, and found it conflicting to have to suddenly replace him. A few hours passed, and at about 3 o'clock, with the heat and drowsiness of pregnancy, I dozed off right next to Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasana, which I called the throne at first. And then I had this dream. I saw Peter Dionov showing me Srila Prabhupada and saying, "You can go, he's like your uncle." I woke up dumbfounded. I knew that Peter Dionov was the spiritual master of Master Ivanov, but I had never meditated or paid any particular attention to him. I knew that he existed but did not know his writings. However, I had sung and danced to his music every day for years. Through this dream I realized that our masters follow us and stand in the dark night of our existence, like lighthouses on the edge of the cliff. They light and guide us, whoever we are, wherever we are, beyond all time. It is a great hope for all of us to know this. It is enough to develop a spark of faith, a spark of desire and sincere questioning, and immediately they are there and help us. We think we are alone and lost in the darkness, but they, from their eternal reality, have an immediate and clear vision of those little fireflies of desire that flash in the material night. And they intervene instantly. So I was comforted and encouraged in high places. An encounter with a genuine spiritual master is always an exceptional event that leaves an indelible mark on our lives. It is a mercy to be sought and wished for it saves our lives. Far from the false clichés of abuse of power and dependency, a true spiritual master sets us free. O Ajanatimir Ndhajya. Jain Jana Alkai. Kakar Unlita Yena. Tasmay I Argurave Nama. I was born in the deepest darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes. With the sword of knowledge he cut the bonds of my ignorance. I pay him my respectful obeisances.